In 1953, at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland presented the Queen with the Bible and said these words, and I quote, "Our gracious Queen, to keep your Majesty ever mindful of the law and the gospel of God as the rule for the whole life and government of Christian princes, we present you with this book, the most valuable thing that this world affords. Here is wisdom, this is the royal law, these are the lively oracles of God." Unquote. In Britain in the past 68 years, the Bible has gone from being the most valuable thing that this world affords to one of the most ridiculed and despised things in the country. And that's been the case in the church almost as much as in the country at large. We face a situation today that has not existed since before Constantine the Great, since the time of the pagan Roman emperors. There is an aphorism that says, "Nature abhors a vacuum." The unpalatable truth is that the vacuum left by the Christian Church's abandonment of her calling to be salt and light to the nations is being filled increasingly by the values of a worldview that is in many respects similar to that of pagan Rome. And it is this worldview that is shaping our modern world. Since the time of Constantine until fairly recently, Western society has acknowledged that higher law of God and believed that all human government and all law must recognise and conform to the higher law of God. This was never perfectly practised, of course, and there was much failure in this respect, and many tyrants who wanted it otherwise, but the principle was acknowledged and understood. It was impossible in medieval times to swear away one's allegiance to God. In every oath of fealty that was taken, there was always a saving of the faith due to God. That is to say, one swore allegiance to one's Lord in life and limb, to obey in all things, save only in one's duty to God. No man could swear away his higher duty to God, and no prince could legitimately demand it. No matter how bad things got, and they did get pretty bad, man's higher duty to God was always acknowledged. It is this fact that gives meaning to the Christian doctrine of the rule of law, which did not mean that all a prince had to do to get his own way was to pass a law, but rather that all law of princes or states must conform to the higher law of God. See the diagram on the screen. This is taken from Christopher St. Germain's book Doctor and Student, 1523, and shows the relationship between the law of God and the different ways that that law is revealed to man. Or to put it another way, as a doctrine of English common law stated, and I quote, "Any law is or of right ought to be according to the law of God." Unquote. The prince or state was under God. Even in the worst tyrannies this was understood, even though abused. This is no longer the case today. Secular humanist states and governments acknowledge no higher law than their own. They are a law unto themselves. And in making themselves the highest law in the land, beyond which there is no appeal to the higher law of God, they effectively put themselves in the place of God. That is to say, they effectively claim the attributes of God. In Western history, one has to go back to the time before Constantine, to the pagan Roman emperors, to find this divine status of the prince or state. This is what attribution of divinity to Roman emperors really meant. It was a political fact. The emperors did not really believe they were divine, except those that were insane, but they did see Roman law as ultimate, and that man's allegiance to Rome came first before all else, and this was symbolised in the imperial cult, that is to say, emperor worship. This was a political issue, not a religious issue in the narrow sense, that is to say, a question of personal devotion to a deity. Rome did not care whom one worshipped as a personal deity, and there were many mystery cults with different gods that one could participate in. Rome wanted Christians to behave in the same way that members of the mystery cults behaved. That is to say, worship Christ to your heart's content in your private devotions, but your politics must be the politics of Rome. You must give your political allegiance to Rome. The Christians refused and said, no, Jesus is Lord, and claimed to be members of his ecclesia first. And the term ecclesia is a political term, not a cultic term. This was a political statement of rebellion against Rome and treason against Rome. Rome, symbolised by emperor worship, was in the place of God. No higher law or lord was acknowledged or permitted. From the time of Constantine onwards, this changed. No matter how badly the principle of man's higher duty to God was practised, it was still understood. Today, though, for the first time since the age of the pagan Roman emperors, the denial of this principle is a reality. Modern states and politicians no longer see themselves as bound by God's higher law and no longer acknowledge this principle. Even when there is a theoretical and constitutional commitment to it, as in Britain, in practice it is denied and Parliament no longer takes account of it in its lawmaking. In this respect, there are parallels between our political systems and ancient pre-Christian Rome. But it gets worse. This principle is no longer even believed in the church on the whole, and the reason that this principle is no longer acknowledged by the state is because the church herself has abandoned it. The apostasy of the church has paved the way and lighted the path to the apostasy of the state. Some years ago I spent some time studying and reading up on the history of the medieval period from late classical times onwards, and particularly, though not exclusively, the history of heresy, particularly the dualist heresies, from the Manichees through to the Bogomils and on to the Cathars. One of the things that has stood out about this, and that I see being frequently brought up by most of the authors I have read, is this. The Orthodox accept the Old Testament, Moses and the law of God. The heretics reject them. The heretics have a truncated scripture. Time and again this comes out. The Orthodox accept the law of Moses, the heretics reject it. Of course, this does not mean that the Orthodox have a perfect understanding or completely consistent theology and practice of the law. Far from it. None of us have. We all have a long way to go. But there is a principle that is accepted by the Orthodox and rejected by the heretics. While in the past, however imperfectly, the Orthodox practiced the faith, and at times it is truly excruciating to read the history of orthodoxy, let alone heresy, the law of God, the Old Testament and Moses, have in principle been accepted by the Orthodox. Those that rejected these were the heretics. Today this situation is reversed. The Church as a whole now rejects the Old Testament, Moses and the law of God. Those who accept these are considered to have a faulty and legalistic theology at best, even if they are not considered heretical, and often they are. The Church of the 20th century is heretical to the core because of this. New Testament Christianity is heretical at heart. There were no New Testament Christians in the New Testament Church. They did not have a New Testament. The scripture of the New Testament Church was the Old Testament. When did the New Testament replace the Old? Not in the New Testament Church, not in the sub-apostolic age, not in medieval times, not at the time of the Reformation, not until the 20th century, except among heretics. Until the 20th century, the rejection of the Old Testament, Moses and the law of God was a definitive feature of heresy. It still is. This is the age of heresy. This continues to be a relevant and problematic issue. Throughout the 2,000-year history of Christianity, there have only been two groups of people that have rejected the Old Testament, Moses and the law of God. Heretics and modern evangelicals. Or rather, I should perhaps really say only one group of people, heretics. The modern apostate and heretical church has led the world to ruin. It is time for the salt that has lost its saltiness to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Time for new wineskins. I want to end by going back to the coronation service and the quotation with which I started. When the Archbishop of Canterbury gave the Bible to the Queen, he did not say, quote, "Our gracious Queen, to help your Majesty with a quiet time every day so that you can cultivate your personal private relationship with God, we present you with this book, a most useful devotional aid for your personal faith," unquote. No, he said this, "Our gracious Queen, to keep your majesty ever mindful of the law and the gospel of God as the rule for the whole life and government of Christian princes, we present you with this book, the most valuable thing that this world affords." This is the truth that the church and the country denies today. The Bible is, as Wycliffe said, and I quote, "for the government of the people, by the people, and for the people," unquote. And as the common law taught, any law is or of right ought to be according to the law of God. This is not a new doctrine. It is the established orthodoxy of the Christian faith. It is those who deny this that are the heretics. If we want peace and righteousness, personal, social, political, we must return to the law and the gospel of God as our rule for life and as the rule for the life of the whole nation. In other words, we must disciple the nation to Christ, not merely make disciples from the nation, but disciple the nation itself, which is what the Great Commission requires. And this is the orthodox teaching of the faith. Anything that denies this is a departure from the faith once received.